chain smoking between periods, surviving a near-fatal car crash, and facing a high-profile legal battle, these are 10 things you probably didn't know about Guy Lafleur. And first up, the time he almost lost his life in a terrifying car accident. But that's not all. Lafleur also faced a challenging legal case in 2008 when he was charged with giving contradictory testimony during his son's bail hearing, a case that made headlines and affected his reputation. If you want to hear all 10 of these wild Guy Lafleur stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to dive into some incredible moments from his legendary career. Next, we'll talk about a deadly habit that everyone knew about, his chain smoking, that almost cost him everything later in life. The situation started on March 24th, 1981. And even though Guy had survived thousands of hockey games, this night was different. After a long night of partying in Montreal, Guy was driving his Cadillac back to his West Island home when he felt his eyes getting heavy. But by the time he realized he was falling asleep, it was too late. Guy's car went flying off the highway and crashed straight into a metal fence. Now, I'm not even sure how anyone survived something like this, but when the fence post came smashing through his windshield, it missed his head by just 1 inch. The metal post went right through the steering wheel and grazed his right ear, leaving Guy bleeding and unconscious in what officials called a complete wreck. When police arrived at the scene, they thought the hockey legend was dead. But when Guy woke up in the hospital, doctors told him he was the luckiest man alive. He needed plastic surgery on his ear, but if he had been sitting just 1 inch to the right, that post would have smashed into his skull and killed him instantly. Look at Guy, man, surviving crashes on and off the ice. But even almost dying ain't as crazy as the addiction that everyone knew about, but nobody stopped. Throughout Guy's entire career, he had one habit that shocked everyone who met him. While other players were drinking protein shakes and watching their diet, Guy was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every single day. And I'm talking about during hockey season when he needed his lungs the most. But here's where it gets really wild. Guy's coach Scotty Bowman revealed that Lafleur would literally smoke cigarettes between periods. Picture this. The Montreal Canadiens are down by 1 goal. The team heads to the locker room for a pep talk, and while everyone else is catching their breath, Guy is lighting up a cigarette. His teammate Joe Sakic said Guy would even smoke in hotel bathrooms during road trips because he was embarrassed, but he just couldn't stop. The craziest part? Guy was still the fastest player on the ice and scored over 50 goals 6 years in a row. Imagine how good he could have been without 2 packs a day destroying his lungs. That's insane, but at least smoking didn't cost him $100,000 like this next story. After Guy won his 4th Stanley Cup in 1979, he was the biggest star in all of hockey. So when the disco music was taking over the world, Guy had what seemed like a brilliant idea. Make a disco album. But not just any disco album. An instructional hockey disco album where he would teach people how to play hockey over funky beats. Guy spent 75 hours in the recording studio just doing his voice parts, talking about skating and checking over disco music that sounded like it came straight from Saturday Night Fever. The album was called Lafleur, and it featured Guy explaining hockey moves while backup singers danced around, singing things like Snap Your Wrist, Let It Go to a disco beat. They made both English and French versions, complete with a 32-page photo book and a poster of Guy looking like John Travolta on ice skates. But here's the kicker. This whole project cost 100,000 Canadian dollars to make. And during every single recording session, Guy admitted he smoked a pack or more of cigarettes just to get through it. The album flopped harder than a goalie diving for a puck, and Guy never made another album again. Damn, imagine spending that much money for nothing. Well, that still wouldn't be as bad as the family scandal that almost destroyed his reputation. By the time Guy was in his 50s, he thought his wildest days were behind him. He was a respected hockey legend, making appearances and enjoying retirement. But that's when his son Marc dragged the Lafleur name through the mud in the worst way possible. Marc Lafleur, who was 23 at the time, got into a relationship with an underage girl that turned violent and controlling. When the cops finally caught up with him, Marc pleaded guilty to 14 different charges, including death threats and keeping the girl locked up against her will. But here's where Guy got pulled into the mess. During Marc's bail hearing, Guy testified that his son was following his curfew and staying home like a good boy. But later, Guy had to admit he was lying. He was actually driving Marc to hotels so he could spend nights with his 16-year-old girlfriend. When this came out, police issued an arrest warrant for Guy Lafleur himself for lying under oath. The hockey legend, who had scored over 500 goals, was now facing criminal charges because he tried to cover for his son. Gira Ahim ended up suing the Montreal police for $3.5 million, claiming they ruined his reputation. The whole thing was a nightmare that showed even hockey heroes can make terrible decisions when family's involved. But even family drama ain't as controversial as the draft decision that made fans hate him. June 10th, 1971, this was supposed to be the greatest day of Guy's life, NHL Draft Day. But what should have been a celebration turned into years of fans booing him in his own hometown. See, Montreal's general manager Sam Pollock had to choose between two French-Canadian superstars, Guy Lafleur and Marcel Dionne. Both players were incredible, but Pollock shocked everyone by picking Guy first overall. The problem was, Marcel Dionne went to Detroit and immediately started lighting up the scoreboard. In his first season, Dionne scored 77 points, while Guy only managed 64. The second season, Dionne had 90 points, Guy had 55. Montreal fans were furious. They thought their GM was an idiot who picked the wrong guy. For 3 straight years, every time Guy touched the puck, you could hear fans grumbling that they should have taken Dionne instead. Sports writers called Guy a bust, and some fans even held up signs saying, "We want Dionne," at Montreal games. Guy later admitted this was the hardest time of his career because his own fans didn't believe in him. It wasn't until his 4th season that Guy finally exploded and proved everyone wrong, but those first 3 years were brutal. But that criticism didn't last long, unlike the jersey number story that became hockey legend. When Guy first walked into the Montreal locker room as a rookie, he was starstruck. His childhood hero Jean Béliveau was still playing, and Guy couldn't believe he was on the same team. But then Béliveau did something that changed Guy's life forever. Béliveau walked up to Guy and offered him his famous number 4 jersey. For a kid from small-town Quebec, this was like being handed the crown jewels. But then, just as Guy was about to say yes, Béliveau stopped him and said something that became hockey legend. Don't try to be a second Jean Béliveau. Be the first Guy Lafleur. Take a number and make it your own. The team trainer then tossed Guy a random jersey with number 10 on it. At first, Guy was disappointed. Number 10 wasn't special, it wasn't retired, nobody famous had worn it. But Béliveau's words stuck with him. Instead of trying to live up to someone else's legacy, Guy decided to create his own, and man, did he ever make number 10 special. By the time Guy's retired, number 10 was raised to the rafters, right next to Béliveau's number 4. The student had become the master, and it all started with Béliveau telling him to be himself instead of a copy. Look at Guy, man, making his own legacy, but even that ain't as crazy as the comeback nobody saw coming. November 26th, 1984. Guy Lafleur shocked the hockey world by announcing his retirement at age 33. He was frustrated with his coach, tired of losing, and ready to move on. 3 years later, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, the ultimate honor that meant his playing days were officially over forever. But Guy had other plans. In 1988, Guy's agent got a crazy idea and called up the New York Rangers. Within days, Guy was signing a contract to come out of retirement. This had only happened once before in NHL history. The legendary Gordie Howe had done it years earlier. But here's the wild part. Guy's first game back was at the Montreal Forum, playing against his old team. When he skated onto the ice wearing a Rangers jersey, 18,000 Montreal fans gave him a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Then Guy proceeded to score 2 goals against his former teammate Patrick Waugh, and the crowd cheered every time he touched the puck. The Rangers lost 7-5, but Guy was named the first star of the game. He had done the impossible, come back from the Hall of Fame, and proved he could still play at the highest level. Only 2 players in NHL history have ever done this, and Guy was one of them. That's legendary, but at least he didn't have to sell his most precious memories like this next story. April 2001, Guy Lafleur did something that broke the hearts of hockey fans everywhere. He put his entire career up for sale in a silent auction. And we're not talking about some random memorabilia. We're talking about his most precious trophies and championship rings. Guy sold 122 items that represented his legendary career. His 1977 Hart Trophy, gone for cash. His 1977 Conn Smythe Trophy for being playoff MVP, sold to the highest bidder, the puck from his very first NHL goal. Some collector bought it, but here's the part that really hurt. Guy sold 4 of his 5 Stanley Cup championship rings. These weren't just pieces of jewelry, these were symbols of the greatest dynasty in hockey history. The whole auction brought in $400,000 US, and Guy only donated about $25,000 to charity. Nobody knows exactly why Guy needed the money so badly, but fans couldn't understand how someone could sell their Stanley Cup rings. These were the same rings he earned during those incredible years, when Montreal won 4 straight championships. When other players heard about this, they were shocked. Most players would rather go broke than sell their championship rings, but Guy apparently needed the cash more than the memories. Imagine selling your championship rings. Well, that still wouldn't be as heartbreaking as what his smoking habit eventually did to him. For decades, everyone warned Guy that smoking 2 packs a day would eventually kill him. Doctors, teammates, coaches, They all told him to quit, but Guy never listened, and by 2019, his reckless lifestyle finally caught up with him in the worst way possible. September 2019, Guy went to the hospital thinking it was just a routine checkup, but doctors delivered devastating news. His heart was so damaged from the years of smoking that he needed quadruple bypass surgery immediately. They had to crack open his chest and replace 4 major arteries around his heart, but that was just the beginning. 2 months later, Guy was back in the hospital needing lung surgery. The smoking had destroyed his lungs so badly that doctors had to remove parts of them. For the next 3 years, Guy fought a losing battle against lung cancer. The man who could skate faster than anyone on earth was now struggling to breathe. On April 22, 2022, Guy Lafleur died at age 70 from lung cancer. The same habit that he thought made him look cool between periods had slowly killed him over 50 years. All those cigarettes he smoked in hotel bathrooms and locker rooms had finally won. The greatest scorer in Montreal history was gone, and smoking was the reason why. Damn, smoking really got him in the end. But even that ain't the craziest part of his early life story. Before Guy became a millionaire hockey superstar, he was just a poor kid from Thurso, Quebec, who would do anything to get better at hockey, and I mean anything. When Guy was only 9 years old, while other kids were playing video games and watching TV, Guy was working on his friend's farm every summer just to stay in shape. Guy would wake up at sunrise to feed animals, lift heavy equipment, and do manual labor for hours. But that wasn't enough for him. His father built homemade barbells in their backyard so Guy could get stronger. Guy also ran for miles every single day to improve his speed. But here's the wildest part. When Guy turned 10, the manager of the local hockey arena made him a deal. If Guy would clean the arena, shovel snow, and do maintenance work, he could have extra ice time for free. So while other kids were hanging out with friends, Guy was mopping floors and fixing equipment just so he could practice more. He spent his entire childhood working harder than most adults, all because he had a dream of making it to the NHL. By age 12, Guy was already dominating kids 3 years older than him at hockey tournaments. All that farm work and arena maintenance had turned him into a machine. No wonder he became the greatest player Montreal ever had. By the time Guy Lafleur became the greatest scorer in Canadiens history, he'd already lived 10 lifetimes of crazy stories. And I know you want to hear more hockey legends, so just click this video right here, and there you have it. 10 absolutely crazy stories about Guy Lafleur that most hockey fans have never heard before. If you enjoyed learning about the wildlife of this hockey legend, smash that like button to help us out. And if you want to see more insane stories about hockey's biggest stars, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss when we drop the next video. Trust me, we've got plenty more shocking stories coming your way.